Why is MV Agusta so expensive? I mean, really, these bikes are comically pricey. They're typically reserved for Saudi princes to buy and park in their penthouse apartments in London or Tokyo. MV Agusta prides itself on being motorcycle art. So obviously those crazy design elements are gonna cost you. But MV Agusta is also a storied racing brand with some serious motorcycle building chops. I got my hands on this MV Agusta Brutale 1000 RS, and in today's video, we're gonna take this bike out on the road, get it back here in the studio, and render a final verdict on whether MV Agusta is merely a brand for those with a bit too much money to burn, or an ultra discerning motorcycle for the enthusiast who wants cutting-edge exotica. Big shout out to the guys at AF1 for supplying me with this bike for today. If you're in the Austin area looking for a new motorcycle, or if you have an Aprilia, Triumph, MV Agusta, or other Euro brand and you need some parts or support, hit them up in the description down below. All right, enough yapping. Let's swing a leg and ride this crazy looking pasta rocket.
All right, boys, the big Brutale, the 1000. I haven't gotten a chance to sample one of these. I've tried the 800, both in dragster and RC configuration. The F3 800 was one of my favorite bikes on track. Let's see how the big Brutale handles. Pretty cool little dash on this thing. Let's fire her up, shall we? Bike is already warm because I did ride her here. Let's get a quick sound check. I don't know, if you ask me, it doesn't really sound all that Italian. It sounds pretty Japanese and conventional to me. Why did it stall? Just MV Agusta things, right? I didn't even do anything. That's the second video in a row that I've stalled. Alright. So the big Brutale, the RS. Does it feel premium? Does it feel expensive? Yeah, I'd say so. MVs always have a lot of theater and drama about them, you know? These are bikes that you don't really get a normal sense on them when you start riding them, you know? Like, they've got everything kind of weird, you know? The dash is kind of weird, the layout of it, the vibe. It, you know, started up and it says motorcycle art, and then you turn the key, you get this interesting little burble, popple, and crackle out of it. Oh my god, dude, old lady trying to go on me. Not today. So lots of power on the old big Brutale here. 208 horsepower out of a 998cc inline 4. Some really cool tech and features on this thing. And from the saddle, it feels like a very bespoke, unique Italian proposition, but the sound that I get out of it feels decidedly Japanese. There's a bit of a different quality of the burble and crackle on this inline 4. We'll let you guys hear it a little bit here. I don't know how they can get away with making this thing so loud stock. Maybe MV Agusta's got to deal with the devil or the EPA. I don't know, one of the two. Chassis is remarkably stable, braking components feel solid, but there's the weirdness of the throttle. This is the first thing I must discuss with this motorcycle, because throttle is really the most important thing when it comes to a bike. That on-off feeling, that initial pickup, initial roll-on, the way the revs build. They're called motorcycles after all, right? The motor, the engine, has to be finely tuned. And I will say, I wish MV Agusta spent a little bit less time on making a bespoke, beautiful little holder for the dash here, and a little bit more time fine-tuning this throttle. It has several issues. The first is 0 to 1 to 10%, which is where you pretty much do all of your riding on a bike like this, especially on the street. You know, you're on the brakes, you pick the bike back up. It's not good. There's two issues with it. It's snatchy, which means that it never feels like you can actually get the correct percentage of what you want. I'll try to show you guys what I mean. Like, for example, if I'm coming up on this car and I go on the brakes and then I pick the throttle back up, you know, it just kind of picks up in this really aggressive, jerky way. And I have tried all of the different maps and modes and everything else on this bike, which, by the way, to change the map, you got to actually change it on over here on the starter switch. Yeah, it took me a while to figure that one out because that's a weird place to put it. So it's snatchy on the pickup, and then there's a noticeable delay. It's very odd, but when you actually request that 0 to whatever, let's say 3% throttle, you feel it open and then it does something. This is not ideal on a motorcycle with this much power and torque. If I'm carving through a twisty road and I request open throttle at a specific point, I'm doing so because I believe the motorcycle is going to have to pick up right at that exact point, right? I don't want the throttle to pick up 10 feet after I asked for it, right? So let's see here on the brakes, you then ask for throttle and it's just kind of delayed. And this is a frustrating experience on this bike. I'm not gonna lie, it is pretty frustrating to use this bike this way. It doesn't get better if you ride it more aggressive or less aggressive. The throttle's always a bit weird on this bike. So major dings for me for that perspective. Now the one party trick it does play extremely well is producing power. Once you actually get the thing opened up and pointed in the right direction, holy crap, you better hang on, because this thing, I believe them when they say it makes 208 horsepower. This motor has one of the broadest swells of torque out of any naturally aspirated inline 4 I've ever felt. Low down, it almost feels like an H2, which is a huge compliment because that bike is supercharged. But this motor has, Jesus, like arm-ripping amounts of torque low down. It's nice. It's a nice amount of power. But here's the thing, when you combine that amount of power with a snatchy throttle, a semi-unpredictable throttle, you know, you're often not using much of the actual throttle tube. You know, with this kind of power, I'm barely ever going more than 20 or 30% unless I've got a wide open straightaway and I've got a lot of visibility. This is the type of motorcycle that you absolutely want to be pointed in the right direction. So combining the excessive amounts of power, let's say, with a bad throttle just means it's not very enjoyable. Caught a little power wheelie going up the hill. Always fun. Just ride the rear brake a little bit. I mean, look at the amount of juice I've got. Good God! Front wheel skating off the ground, man, that's a lot of fun. But this is a class 1 felony motorcycle, man. This is the type of bike that even in a naked bike like this, holy crap, the speeds you can pick up on this thing are just crazy. And it's pretty unique for an Italian motorcycle. Look at that throttle. That was right there. Could you guys tell? I mean, you can't tell when I'm asking for it to open up, but so frustrating the way it just can't quite pick it up when you ask for it. I guess you just never roll off the throttle on this thing, right? Somehow brake and be on the throttle, which is not what you want to do. Get it down here in a second. Let's see, trailing it in, and then it's not good, dude. And when I've got this much power, oh, look at that, man. Just doesn't, I'm sorry, this is not working for me. I'm not gelling with this bike, as you can tell. A bike that has this much performance has got to be dialed in like that. You know, an ADV, a cruiser, anything like that, you know, if it has a delay in the throttle, you may not ever even notice. But something like this, you absolutely will notice that. And again, I've tried all the different settings, the gas sensitivity, different rider modes. Doesn't seem to affect it much. Other oddities include the fact that the turn indicators have the exact same style as the kind of interacting with the dash switch over here. So you see here on my left, as I roll through this road here, if I want to activate this turn indicators, I do that normally like this. But if I want to change the modes on the screen, this button works the same way too. So it's like, why do we have the exact same button doing similar things but changing different parameters? I can't tell you how many times I've been riding this bike and I think I'm hitting my indicators, but I end up hitting this one either. These are all the tiny details that a mass market manufacturer would always get correct. But these are the quirks that you put up with on an MV Agusta because they're just so darn pretty to look at, you know? And I gotta say, riding this bike, you know, you're pretty much always, you're never really looking down that much because it's so fast. You want to make sure you got your stuff pointed where you're trying to go. But the difference here is that MV Agusta bills itself as motorcycle art, right? And if it's motorcycle art, I'd want to feel like it's very artistic and cool to sit on and to, you know, be on this experience. But perhaps these are meant to be looked at more than they are ridden, you know? Look at the pace I got here, man. It's fast, dude. Oh, it's been a while since I've been on a proper fast bike. That's a lot of ponies at my disposal. So yeah, does it feel special when you're on it? Kinda, you know. Not that special though, because there's not much going on with it. I think the experience of being off the bike is equally as important as being on the bike, right? We tend to prioritize here on Yami Noob as specialists with motorcycles. We want that feeling of like, okay, this bike is great to ride, it's got this, it's got that. But the MV really functions as a piece of art. It's meant to be looked at, to be discussed. And an interesting thing happened when I got this bike back in the shop and Logan was there. You know, he and I, maybe this is just our friendship and the way we interact, but I pulled the bike in and we immediately started discussing the kind of like lines that it has, the importance of art in motorcycling, Italian futurism as it relates to fascism. I mean, it's just really interesting stuff, right? And the MV is a conversation starter, right? Not once did I mention the peak horsepower or the, you know, 200 section rear tire or anything like that. I just talked about what the bike kind of represented and what it was. And what it is on road is definitely a handful. It demands your full attention, and it does get it. This is a bike, watch the gravel here. This is a bike that really makes you just shut the hell up and ride the thing, you know, because you got to be really focused when you're on this. So much mid-range grunt out of an inline 4. That is super impressive. So riding it's quirky, it's strange, it certainly feels special. It's got an ass load of horsepower. But let's get it back in the shop and talk a little bit more about MV Agusta, the company, and what makes these bikes so special.
First and foremost, MV Agusta is a small manufacturer. They only make about 4,000 units per year, according to data that I found from 2024. This is less than 1/10 of what Ducati produces, which is about 50,000 bikes per year. And that is even a smaller fraction of what Honda makes, which is, I don't know, 20 million units per year. Honda makes more bikes in 2 hours than MV Agusta produces in an entire year. So this has obvious cost implications for the customer. Fewer bikes sold means lower economies of scale. The R&D costs for MV Agusta are simply amortized over fewer models, which means the price per unit must increase. The bikes are made in Italy with hand finishing on several key components. They also have a much higher degree of intricate parts contributing to the artistic-like feel, but those intricate parts all blending together and slashing their way through the design of this bike means that there's tight tolerances in the bodywork. I mean, seriously, this bike gets crazier the closer you look at it, and it starts to have that hand-finished quality. Seeing these delicate parts flowing and meeting throughout the bike, it's just such an incredible piece of two-wheeled artistry. The materials and processes used on an MV are also more exotic. Take the DLC coating on the fork internals, for example. DLC stands for diamond-like coating. It's an ultra-hard, low-friction surface treatment that's applied to metal parts. Now, it's not super rare by any means, but it contributes to the cost on this bike. Consider these gorgeous quad exhaust tips. Don't you think that a more normal pipe out the back would be cheaper? Well, undoubtedly. But would it be as cool? Hell no. Another important point is that low volumes of production means that the dealer network is relatively small. Those imported parts will add up with cost, shipping, and markups, not to mention tariffs. And when you do take it in for service, because it requires specialized manufacturer-specific work that is really precise with specialty tools, it's going to cost more. You thought the Ducati tax was high? You are not prepared for an MV Agusta. The other part of the equation is the paint and detailing. Look how every piece of this bike is carefully considered. Even the bracket that holds up the dash looks crazy. The clip-ons seem to be sculpted out of the triple tree. The rear light is just pure art. Not liking the way an MV Agusta looks is simply an incorrect opinion. But here's what separates MV from other manufacturers. While there are plenty of manufacturers who are happy to sell you limited edition paint jobs for exorbitant amounts of money, looking at you, Harley-Davidson, MV Agusta pairs this exotica with serious performance chops and value. Let's talk about the engine on this thing. The Brutale 1000 RS utilizes the 998cc inline 4 from the Brutale RR in a virtually unchanged configuration. This mill produces an eye-watering and eye-popping 208 horsepower, and as you saw during my on-road test, it has a two-stroke-like power band and a simply unreal level of thrust. This motor has real-deal race bike tech featuring radial valve configuration. Unlike conventional parallel valve layouts, the valves are arranged radially, angled outward like the spokes of a wheel, and that creates a more hemispherical combustion chamber which improves airflow and combustion efficiency. That allows for bigger valves and a better mixture in motion, and that's more power and a higher rev ceiling. This is really rare in production bikes. The engine also has titanium valves and connecting rods, and also those are pretty rare. An engine like this is not easy to make and requires a high degree of precision machining due to those tight tolerances. The performance that this engine is capable of surpasses many superbikes, so it's not going to be cheap to produce. This engine also includes a counter-rotating crankshaft, which is pretty rare in road-biased motorcycles. Now, notably the Ducati V4 has one, but it's pretty cool to see one on an inline 4 naked bike. Counter-rotating cranks help mitigate the inertial forces from the engine, resulting in a motorcycle that doesn't resist tip-in as much and can change directions a little faster. It also has the added benefit of reducing front wheel lift, which is helpful on a naked bike with this much power and a relatively short wheelbase. The frame is actually one of the more conventional items on this motorcycle, using a chromoly steel in a trellis configuration with aluminum plates holding the engine in place. Other manufacturers such as Ducati with their single-piece aluminum monocoque frames are much more exotic. Now this all comes together at an MSRP of about $24,000, which, all things considered, isn't too much for something this bespoke. But keep in mind, MV Agustas can ring up much higher prices, but this specific example is actually being sold at AF1 a little over 20,000 bucks. It's not bad. Another interesting thing about this bike is the different sizing and style of bolts used. Tiny Torx, Allen heads, all signifying that you should never take this motorcycle apart. Look at the way the front brake line is wrapped together as one unit with all the electrical components, and then they feed out on one side opposite end of the bike. I've never seen anything like that. It's this attention to the tiny details that doesn't really exist with other brands. The other thing that doesn't exist with other brands is how much racing pedigree MV Agusta has. You'd be forgiven for not knowing this, since MV has not had much relevancy in the racing world in the last few decades, but this was a manufacturer that was completely dominant in the 50s and 60s and 70s Grand Prix racing scene. Giacomo Agostini was a serial winner on MV Agusta machinery, amassing 15 world titles. To this day, MV Agusta is the most successful European motorcycle brand in Grand Prix racing history prior to the MotoGP age. They had a similar philosophy to other Italian and racing-focused brands: win on Sunday, sell on Monday. That handcrafted, bespoke racing DNA carries through the company, and even if it has withered a little bit over the years and they're not the most competitive machines. MV Agusta makes motorcycles like no other brand can, or is even willing to. They take bold risks with their designs, and as wild as it is to say, this Brutale 1000 RS isn't even one of the crazier options. The MV Agusta 1000 Serie Oro, for example, will run you $70,000. That's about as much as those limited edition Ducati Panigales with Pecco Bagnaglia's paint schemes on them. But I think MV does a better job of feeling ultra exclusive over nearly any other manufacturer. Not only from a brand perspective, but also from a machine perspective. This is a manufacturer that is truly low volume and exclusive. Buying a Triumph Bonneville with cool paint is one thing, but owning an MV Agusta puts you in a pretty exclusive club. Some pessimistic motorcyclists would say, yeah, it's an exclusive club of visiting the dealership for service every other week because MV Agustas are about as reliable as the McDonald's ice cream machine. And sure, the recipe is there for MV to be extremely unreliable. Low volume, ultra high performance Italian machinery with a bunch of technology and farkles. I completely get the stigma, but I have to commend MV for at least attempting to change this perspective. They're offering bikes with a 5-year warranty going forward, and recently they gained back control over KTM. I'm not sure if any Italian brand can survive without some larger corporation having control over it. It seems that there's just too much passion and chaos for that to happen, but I'm rooting for MV. In a world of boring utilitarian parallel twins that are cross-platformed, MV Agusta is committed to making, well, cool motorcycles. Speaking of which, emblazoned on their website, it says, "We do not simply build motorcycles, we craft emotions." Is that true? Sort of. The serifed font and ultra-stylized aesthetics of the brand are reminiscent of street culture fusing with old-world symbolism. It reflects the ancient traditions of their Italian heritage while giving a nod to the future and the modern. It's inspiring both from an artistic perspective and a motorcyclist perspective. In a way, it reminds me of the merging of worlds between old world artistic tradition and the futurism that we saw in the 20th century in Italy. Well, purchasing an MV Agusta is never going to be an objective decision, nor is it a rational one. MVs are, by their very nature, an appeal to our emotions. The ultra evocative design, the history of the brand, the unbelievable levels of performance, it's all there to inspire us as riders and to give kids a chance to put up some cool posters in their bedrooms. Brands like MV Agusta deserve to exist. I would be gutted if the cold hard blade of capitalism decided that such a motorcycle company couldn't survive going forward. Because it's one thing to ride a motorcycle. That's always going to be a special feeling. Going down the road on 2 wheels under the power of an internal combustion engine, it never gets old. But sometimes, seeing a motorcycle like this, it just kind of stirs the soul and reminds us why we started loving bikes in the first place. MV Agustas are expensive because they give a feeling that very few other motorcycles can give you. There's an exceptional level of theater, both on and off the bike. People on social media these days love to espouse that their ride is a neck breaker. Well, the MV Agusta can truly say that it is. That's why it's so expensive. But is it worth it? Well, that's a different question, and ultimately, that's up to you. I think MV is a brand that calls to certain people, and if you want one, you'll find a way to get one because nothing else will suffice. Thanks for checking out today's video, and a big shout out to AF1 for letting us ride the MV Agusta Brutale 1000 RS in today's show. Check them out in the description below. We appreciate their help, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.